still, of course, coming to terms with the fact that England has the club world champion, and the club world champions are Chelsea. Obviously, there was a lot of partying into the small hours Sunday into Monday. What I can tell you was yesterday when we came off air around lunchtime, 1 o'clock, I got in touch with co-owner Todd Boehly over in New York. Not so much investor fatigue, just a bit of fatigue with Todd. He had just got up, give me a call back later, called him back later, and then eventually pinned him down to doing just a very few moments for us for this show for White and Jordan. Simon and I, remember, met him in Qatar at the World Cup, and he said keep in touch, so we did. And I did. And I spoke to him about winning this thing over the weekend, being the inaugural winners of the Club World Cup, of course. What it meant to him walking out in the pitch at the end with Infantino and Trump and the rest of them. Anyway, co-owner of Chelsea, Todd Boehly, spoke to us, and I put it to him right away. Todd, Club World Champions, how does that sound?
Well, we couldn't have wished for a better outcome for our boys who have done such good work and trained so hard and, really came together in America under Enzo's leadership and his direction. And no one gave us a chance to beat PSG. And the boys really thrived and grew on that. And watching them come together over the last couple of weeks in America has been just very special. And I think that form that you've seen, is everything we hoped when we were putting this together with Lawrence and Paul. And, Badad and I couldn't be more grateful for, the success that they've had. And for all Chelsea fans everywhere, we're just so thrilled and thank you for sticking with us. We're really excited about what the future holds.
Todd, be honest with me. When you landed in the US, did you think you would go so deep in the tournament, let alone win it?
We always knew that, whatever happens on any given day, the odds, that we thought what we had and were able to round out with a piece or two, really, put the boys and really understanding, what Enzo's been doing. We're big believers. We knew all along in the value of the project. And so, I think obviously it came together brilliantly. And those are just odds that you can't predict, but we're hopeful that every day we wake up, the odds are that, Chelsea is going to win something big.
And you certainly have done that. What was the experience like, Todd? We all watched it from over here. You were right in the thick of it. I mean, the day began with you heading to the MetLife Stadium. Thereafter, you watched the game. Thereafter, you're with Donald Trump, the president. I mean, it must have been surreal at times, was it?
It's still hard to all digest. It's been absolutely surreal. But again, I think the thing that just made the day is just how well the boys played. And how they really had nothing to lose, and they put it out there, and they were so organized and so methodical, and the plan that Enzo laid out was so well done. So the combination of the planning and the execution couldn't have made me more proud.
Todd, you very much sent out a message when you brought him in Enzo Maresca we trust. Well, clearly you were right to do that.
Certainly seems it.
I mean, how would you describe your relationship with him? He's an extremely cool individual under pressure, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think he's very skilled at what he does.
How excited are you about the new season? A lot of people will say, well, Chelsea, they could well go all the way and win the Premier League. What's the approach going into next season?
I think the boys have shown that, they are, a force to be reckoned with. And I think that's, what we were hoping for.
Final word, Todd, to every Chelsea fan here. What's your message?
Keep the blue flag flying high.
That was Todd Boehly speaking from New York in an exclusive chat for this show. Simon, should we believe him? We knew all along the value of the project. In other words, that this thing that they were building would come good, and it came good in the MetLife on Sunday night.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's come good in a tournament that has been derided by lots of people, but ultimately has massive economic benefits. It doesn't quite have the cachet that people would like you to believe it has in terms of Infantino and maybe Chelsea right now, but it will do in the future. And they've won it. They've gone in there. They've been in 2 tournaments this year in Europe, the Europa Conference, and won it. They've obviously domestically they've gotten better. They've gone 4th in the league. So you're singing to the choir. I always felt. I mean, first and foremost, they bought what they consider a sports franchise for $2.5 billion. Give or take, right? Whether that money's been transferred or not is irrelevant. That's what they paid. They then promised that they were going to spend another 1.75 billion on bolstering and building this football club back to the standards. Now, what's happened for Todd Boehly is that the optics of how he's come into the industry have not been perhaps as handled as well as he'd like them to have been handled.
Yeah.
He was confronted with the situation with Tuchel instantaneously, and I maintain that most owners and most sensible people, if they were confronted with Tuchel's behaviour at that time, probably would have had the same outcome as Boehly. But of course, Boehly caught the wrath of people saying, how can you newbie, how can you get rid of a guy that's established as a manager, got a track record? Then, of course, he makes strong observations about things like, Northwest's All-Star games that people don't really get the gist of what he was saying and the context he was saying it.
Sure.
Then, of course, he sacks Pochettino. Then, of course, we've got the ticket for Raw around the companies that he's involved in that have got tickets, and people are talking about ticket scalping. But there was little doubt in my mind that Chelsea were going to be successful. And I may yet have my day in the sun when I said about 18 months ago that within 3 years I think Chelsea will win the Premier League. I don't think they will, but there's a distinct possibility they'll get closer than a few people anticipated. So I'd love to be in that position where I can look at the people like Tim Sherwood that thought it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever said, and I've said some ridiculous things, that Chelsea would be anywhere near it.
Simon, you know a hard-nosed, successful businessman when you see one. Is he exactly that?
Yeah,
these guys are capable, right?
He's an investor. I mean, he's an investor in a sports franchise. He knows the value of it and the associated benefits of it. He talked to me in Qatar about the use of anonymised data and how that's going to be utilisable in other industries. He knows that the Premier League is scratching the surface of its opportunity. We're seeing competitions like the World Club Championship that are kicking out 8 games and paying 100 million to the winner. And there's scale and more scale to be had. And the challenges is how do you keep the integrity of the sport? Because we're watching the sport dissolve in front of our eyes in certain ways. We're watching ridiculous rules like multi-club ownership. We open the world up for global investment, and then we turn around and say, but you can't own more than one business. It's just silly thinking what's going on. So there's lots of challenges. But as far as Boehly's concerned, with the way that they're thinking, I sat here with Stefan and we've had various disagreements and agreements over the times that we've been on air. But I've always maintained that Chelsea would find their way through their challenges.
Yeah.
And they have. Now, they've driven a coach and horses through the ridiculousness of PSR by selling the women's team for 200 million quid and re-engineering assets to be able to meet their obligations. But there's little doubt in my mind that Chelsea are looking at we paid $2.5 billion for this. If we handle this right, market this properly, build it up as a sports business alongside a media business, alongside what we can use other aspects of it for, this is a $15-20 billion play. So they are on track for what they want to do. And at this moment in time, they're just picking up momentum on the football field,
right?
Which is, of course, the core principle for people listening to shows like this.
And this is the youngest team, Simon, in Premier League history who have just won the biggest club prize. Who deserves more credit here? The owner for their patience, or the manager for his perseverance?
Well, the manager's only been there for a year. So you can't give him much in the credit column for perseverance, because the perseverance he's had is an opportunity to have an embarrassment of riches foisted upon him on his first major job. Leicester was a job to get them back into the Premier League. This is a whole different ball game, a whole different kettle of fish. Chelsea are a team expected to win things. Leicester are a team expected to get back into the Premier League.
True, but Maresca faced some fan criticism, as you know, and he had to persevere.
Sure, but all managers face fan criticism.
Yeah.
And some of the fan criticism is at that moment in time, and you have to get on with it in the same way you get on with the praise. I think that he's been a riddle wrapped up in a rhyme at times. I think sometimes it's not difficult not to be when you're a manager, because you say things that directly contradict yourself within minutes of having said the first thing.
Yeah.
I mean, as we discussed yesterday with Martin O'Neill, and Martin O'Neill accepts the point that he's done the same thing, that when he was talking about talking down his team at Christmas and everyone was going, this Chelsea side look good, they could be competitive, they could knock on the door of winning the Premier League. No, we're miles off. And so they duly proved it over the Christmas period. And at the end of the season, he had a rail against the media for talking them down. And it's almost as if he's bipolar. You're always sitting there going, well, did you forget what you just said? But the fact is he's done a decent job, and I always thought he would do a decent job, but he's had the modelling clay.
Yeah.
He's had good players there, and there was always now that he's got the boy from João Pedro, who I really like, and Liam Delap, who I really really like. They've got some really added ingredients in there, so they're going to give people a little bit of trouble next year.
I think so. So you heard Todd Boehly speaking exclusively to this show this morning. Chelsea, Stefan, estimated to have earned 85 million quid by winning the competition. Runners-up PSG banked about 70.4 million pounds. Stefan, in a broad sense, what does the Club World Cup and the winnings do for their finances?
Well, the finances, it depends what you're talking finances wise. I mean, you can basically split it in half and say they'll do 40 million in the season that's just gone, because the first half of the tournament was in June, and they'll do 40 million in the forthcoming year. They've still got very big holes in the profit and loss, and we know also that they will have significant bonuses that they'll need to pay off to the players.
And they've got UEFA fines coming down the pike as well, haven't they?
And they've been hit with that fine. So they're in. But the reality is, from a PSR perspective, they're in perfectly good shape now. Of course, because if you sell £275 million of assets to yourself, then that solves the PSR issue. And we know they're also in fantastic shape from a UEFA perspective in respect of the stability football earnings test we spoke about the other day. They've done a very, very good deal where they're paying 20 million euros up front and effectively bought themselves the next 5 years of an easy ride on the football earnings test. So the only thing that's left from a UEFA perspective is the squad cost control and the limit of the 70% that they've got to hit.
Yeah.
And the implications that they've got in relation to their what's known as the List A of the players that they want to register for next season's Champions League. So they've got a bit of a wrinkle there. But, they're trading and people are buying players, and Madueke deal is going to be very important for that. And they have other players who it looks like they're probably going to be able to trade at a profit. And so they'll be fine, I think, on registering players. And so the only thing they've got to worry about is, can they get their costs under control? Their wage bill, contrary to, and I think one of your callers earlier was talking about how smart they've been with the wage bill. Unfortunately, their actual numbers suggest that their wage bill is still extremely large, and likely, given the incentivization that apparently they put into all of these contracts, is likely to be large again for both 24-25, because they actually won things, and also 25-26. So I wouldn't imagine that the wage bill is going to see a big dip. And then on top of that, of course, they've got to sort out their commercial side. And at the moment, we know they still don't have a front of shirt sponsor.
So in a sentence, what's Chelsea's current state of health financially?
I think they're completely fine, because from all of the regulatory stuff, they're basically going to be okay except for a few fines.
Right.
And all of the cash side of things, your man Todd Boehly, who was on the phone, he and his investors will continue to fund the cash.
Where are they with the challenges that they gave themselves by volunteering the information that they had to volunteer to some extent on the disclosure of some of the activities of Abramovich and his team?
Well, this is a very good question. I mean, Jim spoke to Richard Masters now almost a year ago, and he said to you, we are almost at the conclusion of that investigation. And then in January, the Times reported that they were in negotiations for a settlement agreement in respect of that matter, which would still have to go to an independent commission to approve it. And that was said in that article in January they were hoping to complete it by the end of March. Well, we're now almost in mid-July. Well, we are in mid-July, and it's still not happened. Now, I would think probably the sanction agreement cannot be agreed. If it has not been agreed in 6 months, that sounds to me like either the story was wrong, or there is a problem trying to agree a sanction agreement, and therefore it will go to a full hearing and charge.
Yeah. On many occasions, we have Tottenham fans joining us saying, we've got a problem with Daniel Levy at the top of the house because, yes, we have a state-of-the-art stadium, but we want a team in the pitch that wins. And they did win something. They won themselves a trophy. But Daniel still comes in for it. Committing £115 million, though, Stefan, on two players, Kudus and Gibbs-White. Where do we think the money the Spurs money's coming from?
Well, they've just saved themselves 60 million quid because Nottingham Forest aren't selling, are they? And by the way, this morning, if it is correct, the report that there's been a formal complaint to the Premier League regarding that transaction, that I think might actually be quite significant, because once a formal complaint is made to the Premier League, it's either in the form of an arbitration request, i.e. that the two clubs will, that Nottingham Forest will effectively sue in the Premier League rules, will take action against Nottingham Forest, or alternatively they are inviting the Premier League board to investigate Spurs.
Yeah.
And if Spurs are investigated, it will be alleged that they were trying to induce a breach of contract and a breach of confidentiality, and that appears to be relatively serious. Now, the only question is, what's the loss? Well, that's difficult to calculate. Were there other bidders? Have they actually lost anything at all? But it may have developed into a more serious issue. So they may not be spending that 60 million on Gibbs-White this summer.
As it stands, for all the football fan wants to know, the Tottenham fan, are we going to get this guy?
Well, I don't know whether they're going to get him. I think they'll have to pay more than the release fee to effectively settle off the claim from Marinakis. I think, the reality is that Nottingham Forest are basically saying, look, if you want him, you're not having him for the release fee, so we're back in a negotiation. And if it's a release fee deal, then they're saying, well, you've induced him to breach. So we're entitled to the difference between what he's worth and what you've induced him to be sold at.
You told me yesterday, Simon, I didn't realise this. I thought it was a simple case, as with Jack Grealish going from Villa to City, that when the magic number is triggered and the bid comes in that case 100 million, in this case 60, that was it.
Well, I mean, it's a good point, because if you think about how Tottenham might have approached it, let's say Tottenham were aware of it, they could have kept that to themselves and shoved in a bid of the number that did trigger automatically the release. Now, it seems that they didn't do that because the outside world knew that this was a release clause. So I don't know what the process was around that, but it seems to me that if they had just pursued a bid in the ordinary course, in the ordinary way in which they would make that bid.
The three parties that would know this about this release clause would be the player, the agent, and the club.
Yeah.
So if Forest haven't told anybody, then it will come from the agent. So I'm trying to work out where Tottenham have created an inducement. If an agent rocks up to Tottenham Hotspur and says, I represent Morgan Gibbs-White, and I can get him out of Morgan Gibbs-White for the release clause of 60 million quid, are you interested? What's that got to do with inducement?
Because they know. Spurs know, unless
Forest's
Spurs,
case would be against the agent.
Well, yeah, sure, but unless Spurs can show that they really had no idea before the agent turned up and said, oh, by the way, there's a release clause, and they were just sort of caught in the lights, and they were like, oh, I don't know why you told us that, we didn't want to know that. Mm-hmm. Unless that was the case, then Spurs are in the mix here.
Yeah, so Marinakis has got to prove that Spurs approached the agent first and suggested
or there was some kind of collusion or conspiracy around discovering the terms of the contract and the potential of there being a release clause. Now, if there may well be an email.
It's not an easy proof.
Sure, but there may well be a WhatsApp.
If he's got a smoking bullet,
is there a WhatsApp from Spurs saying, what do we need to bid here?
Yeah,
to get the player. Right, which is not unlikely that there is something like that. Then maybe Nottingham Forest.
Inducement?
Well, it's close, isn't it?
Has it inducement?
Well,
you're able to
because they might suspect, or on the look. Let's be honest. They know. They knew about the release clause.
Yes, I think
right.
So everybody knows everybody's business.
I know that.
I think Marinakis is tub thumping, as he does in lots of different instances. It might end up in the same situation as Virgil van Dijk. That somehow along the line that there's a consequence for Spurs' perceived overindulgence in being overzealous in the information.
Yeah, but that's probably quite significant in that case, because I think with Liverpool and Van Dijk, it was easier for Liverpool to say, look, we'll just come back for you in January.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
But it's still charged with, didn't they?
So there's a bit to go yet.
Yes, and they paid up. But also Gibbs-White is not...
But do I think the answer to the question is, would I sit here and put my money down on Gibbs-White going to Spurs? Yes.
You would. Okay. transfers going down. Also some talk about various top players on the move, and this man is right across the lot. Chief football correspondent here at talkSPORT, Alex Crook, stops by to join Simon and myself. And we're honoured that you've come into the studio this Tuesday lunchtime. Alex, good to see you as always, mate. Am I right in thinking, should Liverpool fans take a deep breath here? News about Luis Diaz this lunchtime.
Yeah, we can confirm what our colleague at The Athletic, David Ornstein, is reporting. A bid has gone in from Bayern Munich, €67.5 million for Luis Diaz. It's been rejected, and that really backs up what we've been saying on talkSPORT for a few weeks now, that Liverpool don't want to sell Luis Diaz. I think the player probably is hankering for a move. Maybe he doesn't see himself as a guaranteed starter at Liverpool, but I think if anything, the onus is on Liverpool adding to their attack rather than weakening it. I think they would sell Darwin Núñez if they get a suitable bid for him, but at the moment Diaz not for sale. That's the message not just that Bayern Munich have received this lunchtime, but Barcelona have also shown some interest in Diaz as well.
Wow, he's popular, isn't he? The Liverpool fans love him, Simon. I think there would be a great degree of pulling out of hair if Luis Diaz was to depart the scene at Liverpool. He's a favourite, and it's easy to see why.
Good player.
Yeah.
So if someone's going to buy him, they're going to have to pay the money that Liverpool want, and that means that they're going to have to bid way above what perhaps a player's worth.
This Hugo Ekitike is a name that comes up a lot. Frankfurt striker. Newcastle pushing hard, but they've got company, have they?
They have. It's an interesting one, actually, because you're right, his name does come up a lot, not just this window, but in windows past. Newcastle were very close a few winters ago to signing Ekitike. Ended up going to Paris Saint-Germain. Didn't work out at all for him there. He's gone to Frankfurt. He scored a lot of goals in the Bundesliga, and Newcastle have accelerated their interest. Frankfurt looking for a fee of around about £78 million, so that would be a club record for Newcastle. I know Andy Howe, very influential there on the recruitment side, is leading the charge for this one, as he did with Anthony Elanga and various big-name signings in the past, but not for the first time this summer. Newcastle do fear a hijack, possibly from Liverpool, possibly from Chelsea. Now, there's going to have to be a few dominoes knocked for this to happen, because Nicholas Jackson, I'm told, is a player that Chelsea are open to interest in. He's had his nose put somewhat out of joint by the signings, not just of Liam Delap, but João Pedro as well. If Nicholas Jackson is sold, and there are clubs monitoring his situation, don't be surprised to see Chelsea make a move for Ekitike, certainly on their list of potential replacements. And the agent at the centre of this deal is one Ali Barrett, described in some quarters last night as, quote, a super agent. He's done a lot of business with Chelsea, including the Moises Caicedo, then British record transfer from Brighton. Interestingly, he also represents Nicholas Jackson.
Right. You say these are two words that shouldn't really go together, Simon. Super and agent.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Ali Barrett. That's a new one on me. Forest, of course, in the news at the moment, alongside Tottenham and Morgan Gibbs-White. We heard a short time ago that there's a bit more to run in that one. It's not maybe as clear-cut as many of us, including myself, thought it might be. But Forest in the news again this lunchtime, and Douglas Luiz in that same news category.
Yeah, just on Morgan Gibbs-White, Marinakis seems determined to dig his heels in here. I tend to agree with Simon. I'm not sure who he plans legal action against, but he's not going to make it easy for Morgan Gibbs-White to make that move to Tottenham. There were some rumours on the internet that maybe Morgan Gibbs-White had skipped training today. That isn't the case. I've checked in with Forest. He has been training, and I would expect him to keep his head down and hope that this matter can be resolved. Douglas Luiz, an interesting name as far as Forest are concerned. Helped Villa qualify for the Champions League. They sold him this time last year, mainly I think to get on the right side of PSR regulations. He's keen to come back to the Premier League, and it's my understanding that Forest are one of the clubs showing strong interest in him. One stumbling block is wage demands, over 100 grand a week. But I think Marinakis, whoever he loses this summer, and obviously Elanga has already gone, I think he will replenish the squad. He's ambitious, as you know. He told you at that playoff final they weren't in the Premier League just to make up the numbers, and I think Douglas Luiz would be somewhat of a headline statement signing.
Did you find it frustrating, Simon, in your time at Palace, when a player gets in his mind what he should be earning and what he's due, it's pretty much well nigh impossible to shift him of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge, isn't it? Because if you're signing a player, then you're expressing a degree of interest in wanting him in the building, and then it becomes a different position. I wanted to go back to this Ekitike. €90 million for a player that scored 17 goals for Eintracht Frankfurt. €90 million.
And I think only started one game for PSG in Ligue 1 as well. But I guess the price tag is again a reflection of the fact there aren't that many centre forwards out there.
I mean, I know he's 23, but Arsenal are buying Gyökeres for what, 55, 60 million, and they're buying this kid. Maybe you're just paying the potential, but 78 million quid, 90 million euros, it's off the charts.
I'd love to be a fly in the wall with you negotiating with super agent Ali Barrett.
Ali Barrett.
That'd be an interesting one. West Ham in the news is, how's David Sullivan? I haven't spoken to him for a while. What are West Ham up to?
Well, they've got one signing in the door, a wing-back, Juth, coming in from Slavia Prague. I think that's a pretty big indication that Graham Potter is going to play with a back three next season. He did it to good effect when West Ham won at Arsenal. They want a midfielder as well. They're one of a number of Premier League clubs interested in Harvey Elliott, another player that Liverpool are willing to sell, but I think the price tag at the moment probably too rich for West Ham. Liverpool looking for 40 million plus for Elliott, player of the tournament at the Under-21 European Championships, very much England's star man as well. They've got other options, West Ham, Tyler Morton, another young player at Liverpool, James McAtee, a City player, again, is attracting a lot of interest. And then there's the likes of Kieran Dewsbury Hall and Mateus Fernandes at Southampton as well. But they're going to have to be quite frugal this summer, West Ham. They went big a year ago. Tim Stighton, the sporting director, wasted an awful lot of David Sullivan's cash, in my opinion. So they've already got Kudus off the wage bill. I think if Paquetá does get cleared by the FA of gambling charges, they may well sell him as well. So, yeah, interesting summer for West Ham. And I guess there may be one of those sides in danger if one of the newly promoted sides, Sunderland, look the best equipped to me at the moment, surprise a few people, they could be sucked in, West Ham.
Isn't it crazy that Paquetá story is still at a standstill?
Well, I would assume it's something to do with his end rather than their end. I mean, in order to charge him, they must have some very, very strong evidence, because this is really significant stuff that he's being charged with. So I can only assume that if the player himself wanted to move this along quicker, given it's his career that's ultimately being decimated by opportunities in terms of he was like to go to Man City a couple of years ago. This is all blown up in his face.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if you wanted to exonerate yourself, I suspect you could move quicker than what they've moved.
Yes. You would think so. I saw one message go through a short time ago. Danny, who's a Wolves fan, thanks for that, Simon. I think you tipped them, although you hate doing it, and I hate doing it, maybe to go down.
Yeah, well,
or maybe a candidate to go down.
They're selling some of the best players.
Yeah.
Or having some of the best players taken from them. It's not going to be helpful for them. I mean, they've got a great manager, did a great job last year, but they've still got the same challenges they've had for some time, which is the ownership model has lost its appetite a little bit.
You got news for us on Wolves this lunchtime, Alex?
Yeah, and this is good news as far as Vitor Pereira is concerned, because I agree with you. They've been decimated this summer. Obviously, Cunha to Manchester United, Aït-Nouri to Manchester City, Nelson Semedo, another of their best players, has let his contract run down. He hasn't actually signed for another club yet, I don't think. There is a 4-year deal waiting for him at Molineux, but no indication that he'll put pen to paper. One player who was really influential once Pereira came in was Andre, the midfielder from Brazil. He's wanted by Juventus and clubs in Spain. I approached Wolves yesterday. Someone very senior there said simply, Andre not for sale. So Vitor Pereira has been promised at least one of his star men will be staying.
I'm putting you in the spot to a degree, but any news on the so-called Manchester Five, those ones who are thrust to one side, aren't part of the regime at the moment in the eyes of Ruben Amorim? Any news on the likes of Garnacho, on the likes of the others, who at the moment, Rashford included, seem to be standing still?
I think Anthony to Real Betis looks the most likely at this moment in time. He's willing to take a pay cut, had a spell on loan there last season, did really well in Spain, got them to the Conference League final, so I think that one probably is the most advanced. In terms of Marcus Rashford, he's made it clear, Barcelona, the only club he wants to join. As I've said repeatedly, I think if he goes there, A, he'll be a lucky boy, and B, it will only be a loan deal. That's what Barcelona will be willing to offer. So really, it just kicks the can down the road, and we'll be back, I'd imagine, in this situation in a year's time.
Yeah, sure. I've got a feeling the Rashford one will go. It's got some way to run yet.
Yeah, I mean, they go on pre-season tour in the not too distant future, and I think we can safely say that those 5 players won't be part of that tour.
They'll be watching from distance. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alex Crook, Chief Football Correspondent here at talkSPORT, and that is the perfect reason as to why, because that is all the transfer news this lunchtime. Luis Diaz, though, in spite of big interest elsewhere, at the moment carries on in a Liverpool shirt. governance bill, as you know, Stefan, returns to Parliament today. Those who want the independent regulator are very close to getting their wish. The purposes of the bill to establish a regulator to oversee the men's game in England's top 5 divisions. Are you having these things, or do you, like Simon, foresee problems on the horizon?
Yeah, I'm more towards Simon's view than your previous guest. I mean, I think, first of all, the remit is too wide to start with. We have so many clubs in the country that unless you had an enormous organisation around the regulator, it's going to be very hard for them to have a major impact. So I think they're going to have to be quite careful about what matters that they target. Clearly, if they can focus in on dealing with this EFL versus Premier League issue and get that done and over the line, then that will be something that's meaningful and useful for them. But I think unless there's going to be a proper commitment financially in building the resource around the regulator, which I think would have other implications anyway, but unless you have the proper budget for this organisation, I just don't see how it's going to be able to compete.
And they don't have the proper budget, in your eyes?
Oh, nowhere near. Nowhere near. I mean, if you look at the budget that we know about for the Premier League last season, it was something like £50 million on legal fees alone. And that's without all of the other infrastructure around that the Premier League has. The football regulator apparently has a budget of £10 million per season for everything. It's got...
so it's not even going to scratch the surface?
Well, I don't know how it's going to. If you look at the adverts that are out there for very, very senior jobs at the regulator, and you look at the sorts of salaries that are being offered, they are not competitive in the commercial world. So by all means, there will be some high-quality people who are prepared to effectively give a quasi-public service for this, in a very interesting environment, and that's fantastic, and I wish them very well. And I think that the chairman that they got on board, I watched the DCMS interview that they did. I thought he was superb, and I don't think they could have got anybody better for that role, with that CV, with that salary. They couldn't have got anybody better. But to build an organisation that's going to be able to compete with all of these clubs and all of the legal resources that they have around them, and make it effective, I think is going to be incredibly difficult.
When I had said that you were joining us, interestingly, quite a number of Crystal Palace fans have got in touch. Do you know anything that we don't know at this stage, Stefan? Because I know you're talking behind the scenes about what financial strings may or may not be pulled by Palace. What strings at all may be left to be pulled regards to the predicament that they find themselves in. We now know Crystal Palace, FA Cup winners Crystal Palace, instead of playing Europa League football, they're looking at Europa Conference League football. They've been demoted because of this multi-club situation involving John Textor. It's carrying on. Would an appeal, Stefan, what could an appeal be based on? And what sort of time frame might we be looking at?
Yeah, so I was just reminding myself of the name of the club that went through CAS yesterday. So there has now been two multi-club, correct. So there's been 2 cases now that have gone through CAS around the multi-club appeals process. We know that Crystal Palace have appealed. It will be expedited. I would think that it will be heard. I mean, the Drogheda one was, if that's the way you pronounce it, probably not, but Drogheda. Yeah. Right. So they did it in 5 days, and I think that was because they had a deadline of the qualifying rounds. This second one took 10 days. And the decision on both of them came very quickly on the same day. So they're held remotely, and the decision of the panel has been pretty simple so far. In both cases, they immediately dismissed any arguments around the 1st of March and around the notification of the clubs. And I heard Simon yesterday give a very detailed analysis of why that argument will not fly, and Crystal Palace suggesting that they weren't aware of the situation, I think is a hopeless argument. And to be honest, I doubt they'll even run it. So that part of it is gone. I think what the Crystal Palace will need to focus on, and it will be very challenging, no question, because first of all, the CFCB would not have come to this decision lightly. If you read the decision that they made in the Red Bull decision, they recognise that this is a major sanction on a club to relegate them between 2 tournaments, so that they understand the consequences of the decision that they've made at UEFA. But they believe, and it's all very well, Crystal Palace and Crystal Palace fans saying, we are not part of a multi-club organisation. We do not have any interaction with Textor. The reality is that they have concluded that they are part of an MCO and that they do have connections with John Textor. and that they did not resolve those in the requisite timescale. So to undermine those at CAS, they will have to either show some fundamental misunderstanding that the CFCB had. Now, that's going to be very difficult because presumably there's been an interaction a number of times over the last few weeks between Crystal Palace and UEFA, where any of the clarificatory stuff that the CFCB was seeking, Crystal Palace could have informed them of. So that obviously it's not going to be easy to do that. Or maybe they can show that one of the elements, maybe a piece of paper or a development, is so significant that CAS can say that it was underweighted by the CFCB, and therefore if you take it into account, then the end result is different and that they can play in the Europa.
In a few words, how would you describe Palace's chances?
I think you've seen two of the situations be rejected. It's obviously very challenging to win at CAS in this scenario.
Well, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, for those who don't know, FC DAC 1904, Slovakian club, they were in front of CAS yesterday. And DAC argued that UEFA's change in the relevant assessment date was invalid and not enforceable. And CAS laughed in their faces.
It's for all the reasons Simon
get
said.
The same reaction
on that part of it, no question. It's all everything Simon said yesterday about this situation. Everybody knew about it. That Crystal Palace are saying, "Oh, we went to the wrong email address." We know for a fact that the Premier League themselves in October sent an email to all the clubs saying, "Just so you're aware, there's been a change of the rules in relation to the MCOs." And therefore, you need to be aware that the rules have changed. So please check it. Please get your your club secretary to check it. Furthermore, this is not a situation where it's now unexpected for Premier League clubs to go into European competition. There's now 3 major European competitions. We have half the league, right? More than half of the teams that stay up in the Premier League qualify for European competition this season. It's not acceptable to say, well, we didn't understand the rules and we didn't understand them early enough. And then furthermore, in the back of Crystal Palace's accounts, there's a whole analysis of how they comply with UEFA licensing. So it's just not right that Crystal Palace weren't aware of it. Their stronger argument, of course, is that there was no decisive influence from John Textor. But we've spoken to John Textor. We've heard from Steve Parish. I mean, some of the things Steve Parish in the interview that he gave, he said, "Oh yeah, well, when I went into the CFCB, they asked me whether Mr. Textor has any influence." I said, "Well, yes, of course he has influence. My 8-year-old son has influence." That was a terrible answer. The answer should have been no.
Yeah.
He said yes. Right? It's not the same as decisive influence, but the point I'm making is that all of these people around this situation have done a lot of talking, right? And not all of it matches the reality. And it's the same thing in terms of their documentation that I mentioned earlier and their report and accounts. You go to the back of the report and accounts and there are disclosures in the related party section about the dealings between Molenbeek and Crystal Palace and Lyon and Crystal Palace. Now, they're not enormous. I'm not saying that they're very big, but to say that they have no dealings between each other is just not true. And in the prior season, the sponsorship at the Selhurst Park, a John Textor sponsorship, again, is a related party. So the idea that there's just no, he's just a silent partner, it isn't right. And so these are the things that when it went to the CFCB and they were effectively cross-examined, they may have had some holes and differences when the 3 of them spoke.
Right. We know later on the day, Stephen, you're probably aware of this, Simon, a sizable bunch of Palace fans are going to have a protest march about this. What that achieves is anybody's guess, but the right to voice their opinion, of course. Stephen, outline it for me and the listeners and the viewers on YouTube and your smart TV at this time. What's the financial implication for Palace dropping into the Conference League as opposed to Europa League?
Yeah, well, this is the irony, actually. I mean, I think they might be better off in the Europa League, in the Europa Conference anyway, because ultimately, your participation fee, there's about €1 million difference, that's all. So you 3 million in the conference, 4 million in the Europa. You've then got prize money per game. Yes, you get a bit more for each win, but not very much more for each win. And if you look at the clubs who are in the Europa League, they're a really good set of clubs. I'm not saying Crystal Palace cannot compete in that tournament, but they are definitely going to win more games in the conference than they would win in the Europa League. So in the Europa League, you've got a number of clubs who we're familiar with from the Champions League. We've got a World Club Cup team. Salzburg are in the Europa. You've got Club Brugge, who had an amazing season last season in the Champions League. They're in the Europa. So it's a very competitive competition. Flip over into the conference, and actually you go down the list. There's Fiorentina in there, but beyond that, there is a really good chance that Crystal Palace can get to the semi-finals at least. And if they got to the semi-finals and you compare that to, say, round of 16 in the Europa League, there's almost no difference in the financials.
I think from the Palace hierarchy's point of view, Palace have got to win this damn thing.
But they can. That's the point.
But they've got to.
And not got to. I mean, ultimately, if they got to the final and banks, I don't know, 15 million quid before cost, it's not the end of the world. Winning it, the key thing about winning it, of course, is you get a place in next season's Europa.
True.
The season after.